Many years ago, when I was learning how to drive, I had my beginner's driver's license. I lived in Ohio, in Cleveland, and I had my beginner's. My sister, who's a year older than me, she had her license, and she didn't like to drive, so I got to drive everywhere. So she was my licensed driver, and we drove a little red Chevy Chevette, all right? All right, yeah, and this was nice. We got it from my uncle. It's a used vehicle. My uncle's a car guy, so it was actually a stick shift. So I learned to drive on a stick, and I haven't driven a car with stick shift much since that time, but I can still do it because once you learn how, you just keep knowing how to do that. It was actually a diesel, which is a very unusual car. It's a diesel engine, and so we had to be careful not to run out of gas or out of fuel because they had to tow it then. So we had this little Chevette, and I would drive most of the driving with my sister, especially on the way to school, so my sister could put her makeup on, right? And all the girls understand that. And so she would get out of bed at the last minute, and so on the way to school, she was doing her makeup while I was driving the Chevette. One day, we were coming down this hill on our street, and as we crossed the street on West 98th, where I grew up, and Denison Avenue, I pulled through that light, and there's a bank on the right-hand side. This car pulled out of the bank as I was coming through the intersection and hit us on the side, on my sister's side. Not my side. I was fine. Oh no, you're worried about me. It's my sister's side, and it just happened so fast, and it pushed us over in the other lane, but before we could even feel what happened and figure out, get out of the car, just see what's going on, the guy pulled away, left the scene of the crime, and so we're like, I'm here just 16 years old and don't have my full license. My sister's 17 and she has her license, and we're just trying to figure out what's going on, and here's the guy has left the scene, but what happened was there was a guy that was waiting for the bus right on the corner. And that guy saw everything that happened. And he had the wherewithal to get the license plate number of the car that left the scene. And because we had a witness to testify on our behalf, didn't have to go to court, but we had the driver's license. And so the insurance company worked it all out because we had a witness, all right? So we had someone to witness the accident. Well, today we're going to pick up our study in Hebrews chapter 12. And we're going to look at this great cloud of witnesses that we're introduced to here in Hebrews chapter 12 and beginning in verse number 1. The Bible says this, "Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us." There's a lot in that verse to unpack. We're not going to go into much of that verse, but we're just going to take that phrase, the great cloud of witnesses we're introduced to here. So question number 1 is, who are the witnesses? Who are the witnesses? And that's always a question, and you may have different opinions, but I believe that the word wherefore points back. Wherefore, we're compassed about with a great cloud of witnesses. It's pointing back to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11 is the Faith Hall of Fame. All these people are listed in Hebrews chapter 11. As he goes through this whole list of people, then he says, "Wherefore, seeing we're compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses." I believe he's pointing back to Hebrews chapter 11. These are the witnesses we're talking about. The question is then, what are they witnessing? What are they looking at, all right? And so many people here picture a stadium where we're here in the middle on earth running the race, and all those who are saved and all these Old Testament saints are kind of looking on and watching what's going on. So that brings up the question, can people in heaven see what's going on earth? I don't have a full answer for you today. There's difference of opinion. I have an opinion on it. I'm going to give you my opinion. This is my opinion based upon what I know of the Bible. But if you have a different opinion, that's fine. And I know great people that disagree with me. They're wrong, but they'll disagree with me. That's fine. So I don't believe that people in heaven are watching us in the great stadium and they're seeing what's going on. I don't believe that. And here's 2 reasons why. I believe there's too much sin here on earth and too much glory in heaven to be concerned with what's going on in our everyday life. It may make us feel good, and we may think about that, but I just can't imagine in heaven they're watching all the sin and debauchery that's going on on this earth. Meanwhile, they have Jesus Christ, God the Father, angels flying, people to talk to, and this is what they're watching. So I don't think that's the case. I do believe they understand something that's going on earth, because the Bible says that there's joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repented. So I think they do understand when people get saved, there's a loudspeaker, an announcement, so-and-so got saved, or we had 12 saved today. I don't know. I remember back in Cleveland Baptist, and back in my day, when we had a big church and people would get saved, we get so excited when they say, hey, here's some names of people that got saved, and we get so excited. There's excitement and joy in the presence of the angels of God when one sinner repents. So there is some knowledge of what goes on. I don't think they're watching us that way, like a big stadium. You get the idea from the word encompassed about. Encompassed or compassed about. That word means to be, to wrapped up in or to be involved in. In fact, it's used in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 2, where it tells us that Jesus Christ himself was compassed with infirmity. All right, so he took upon him a weakness of human flesh, and so he was compassed about with it. It became part. And so I think this is the idea of we just have this great group of witnesses all testifying. So I believe, and the word martyr, witness there is martyr or to testify. And so this is what I believe. I believe they're not witnesses of us, but they're witnesses to us. That makes sense? They're not watching everything we're doing, but they're witnessing to us. Rather than picture a great stadium where they're watching us do our race, I want you to picture a courtroom where witnesses are called to testify. And they're trying to convince you that the faith life is worth it. It's a test. They're a witness. They've gone through it. They've been there. They've done that. They've gone through some hard times, and they're here to testify to you of what is true. And having known now, if we could bring back, if I could put up a stand and say, okay, I'm going to call a witness today, Abel. If I could call a witness today, Moses. Moses, tell us what you think about the life. What should we do in this life? Well, here's the testimony. Here's their witness of what they would say. So I think that's the idea here. It's more of a testimony. What would they say? That's what I want to talk about today. What would they say? And again, this is speculation, but it's not, because we have their stories in Hebrews chapter 11. So as we look back in Hebrews chapter 11, we won't read all those verses. Let me kind of pick through a few things. Here's what I think they would tell us today. Number one, victory is possible. I think they would, if they'd testify, say, hey folks, victory is possible. You can live the life of faith. You can finish your course. You can keep going. You don't have to wander. You don't have to give up. Right. Think about this. What's the great example of Hebrews to this point? He keeps pointing back to Israel's failure. The big example of Hebrews to this point is the example of what not to do. Ever heard that said? Every man's my teacher, either what to do or what not to do. And so the writer of Hebrews says, don't be like Israel. Don't lack the faith to move into the land of rest because you lack faith and then end up wandering and wasting your life. Don't do that. That's the big example of the book of Hebrews. It's an example of failure, lacking faith to move forward. But now, near the end of Hebrews, we're introduced to example after example after example after man after woman, people just like you and me. People who struggled. People who messed up big time. People who we can read the story of over and over and over again that did accomplish something by faith. And so here's the testimony. Victory is possible. Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Rahab, etc., etc., etc. These all had faith at one point to keep moving forward. Israel got to the promised land, lacked the faith to step in. These people got to that moment of decision. That point in their life was Abraham going to take Isaac up to the mountain and draw that knife and kill his son? Yes. He got to the very point of obedience by faith. He passed the test. Victory is possible. So let's not look too much at the example of Israel as an example of failure, but look at these examples. Victory is, they weren't perfect. Man, I'm so glad. Aren't you glad the Bible records some of the sins of the Old Testament saints? You can say like, and some of you identify with different people. Some of you may identify with Peter in the Bible because you run your mouth and you say the wrong thing at the wrong time, right? And some of you may identify with David because, David was a very emotional person that kind of had these bouts with discouragement and depression, but yet was a great warrior, and he had this dichotomy inside. And maybe you identify with different people. All of us can identify with people in the Bible because they are sinners, and here we have sinners who lived by faith. It's a great example. So victory is possible. So I tell you today, whatever state you're in, whatever you're going through, victory is possible. Don't listen to me. Listen to Moses. Listen to Abraham. Listen to the great cloud of witnesses that we have. And one by one, they testify over and over again, victory is possible. But I think they'd also say victory is difficult. Victory is difficult. You want to win, you gotta endure something. Didn't it cost Abel his life, right? So it wasn't like it was a simple choice. Like it cost him his life. Noah had to work for years on the ark, year after year. And we speculate, the Bible doesn't say, we speculate that he got mocked, and we just know he was a preacher of righteousness that time, and nobody turned, just his family was with him in the ark. And so we see Noah going through the grind of obedience. Hey, folks, if you're going to obey the word of God, there's a grind to obedience. Victory is difficult, but it's possible. Abraham had to wander by faith. I find it interesting. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8 tells us that by faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. He just lived as a nomad. He wandered through the wilderness. Here's a man who's very wealthy, called to live in tents. I know some people that own several houses. One here, one there. They travel around. And Abraham could have afforded to do that, but God said, no, you're going to live in a tent. And you're going to wander through the wilderness. I'm not even going to tell you where you're going to go. Just trust me. And so this is not an easy decision. I find it interesting that the example here is Abraham wandered by faith. Israel wandered by unbelief. So, both were same result. One wandered, he wandered, but he was doing it because God. So don't judge somebody else. Everybody else is going to run their own race, right? And so Israel wandered because he didn't believe, but Abraham wandered because he did believe, and so God's got everything under control. But Abraham just had to live this nomadic life, not knowing. Moses had to choose affliction over pleasure. Verse 25, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Give me two choices. Behind door number 1, we have affliction. Behind door number 2, we have pleasure. Which would you choose? I choose door number 2. Thank you very much. We choose pleasure. But Moses, by faith, saw that the pleasure wasn't lasting and the affliction wasn't lasting. Right? And so what was portrayed on the door didn't really translate to what was behind the door. My wife watches sometimes the TV show, Let's Make a Deal. Right? She's a game show kind of person, right? And so what's behind? Do you want what's in the envelope or behind door number? All these choices, right? Door number 1, it looks like pleasure, but in behind it's only for a season. And there's payday someday for the being away from God. But this door shows you affliction, but behind that affliction is reward. Right? And so these choices are not easy. Victory is possible, yes, but victory is difficult. Number 3, I think they would testify victory is ahead. It's always ahead. It's always after the step of faith. You have to take that step into the unknown. You have to take that jump. You have to move forward and not really know exactly what's going to happen. That's why they call it faith. If you knew exactly what would happen every time you make a decision, there's not much faith to that. I mean, we have faith in eternity in heaven. I've never been there. I can see it with an eye of faith, but I don't know what it's like. Victory is ahead. It always comes after the step of faith. Look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13. Talking about some of these Old Testament believers. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Verse 39 says almost the same thing. These all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. I don't like this part. I don't like the part that these people died in faith, not having received the promise. They had a promise that they held on to. They didn't even see it in this lifetime. They saw it in eternity. So faith, victory is ahead. We just know how far ahead it is. You may not see the reason or the purpose of your trial and suffering on this earth. They didn't see the result of all that they did on this earth, but they held on to the promise. So victory is ahead. It doesn't happen immediately. And none of us like to wait for that. We want to know, like, I decide today, I get rewarded today. It doesn't work that way. And that's the last thing. Victory is rewarding. There is a reward to victory. I think all would testify that every trial, every difficulty, every step of faith was worth it. This is if we could bring them up here and set them down, and you have a chance to quiz them and ask them questions, and you could cross-examine them in this examination, they'd say, it's worth it, it's worth it, it's worth it. It's going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy. People won't understand what you're doing, but trust God. Trust me, it's worth it. I've been there, I've done that. Victory is rewarding. In fact, at the very root of faith is the idea of reward. That's what the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse number 6. As the very basics of what faith, as we try to define and wrap our head around what faith is, Hebrews 11 verse 6, but without faith, it's impossible to please him, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, what? And that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Not only do you got to believe that there is a God, but that God will reward you if you diligently seek him. You have to believe that. That's the very root of faith. Again, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13. These all died in faith and not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. I want you to notice these phrases. And were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. They didn't receive the promises. They knew that they were ahead, and they embraced it. That word embrace means to embrace. It means to hug somebody, to get a hold of it and say, like, okay, this is the life that I'm called to live. Just accept it, embrace it. I'm holding on, I'm grabbing hold of that promise of God, knowing that I may never see the result in this lifetime, but I'm not letting go. They embrace the promise. They are persuaded. They were convinced. I got to keep moving forward. I got to keep moving forward because I'm convinced in the end it's worth it. And they confessed. The word confess just means to agree with, say the same thing. I confess I'm a pilgrim and a stranger in this land. This world is not my home. I'm just passing through. I accept that. I embrace that. I'm embracing the grind of obedience on earth, knowing that there is a reward in heaven. Embrace it. Accept it. Listen to the great cloud of witnesses. They came to terms with the fact that they were pilgrims and strangers on earth. Pilgrims mean just passing through. Strangers means you just don't quite fit in. And so if we haven't caught that yet, if we want to live a biblical life, it's going to be a little different than everybody else. We'll be strangers and pilgrims.
So the men and women here in Hebrews chapter 11, I think, encompass us about, not in a great stadium, but witness one after another. Let this ring in your heart and your mind. Let this engulf you just like Jesus allowed the flesh to engulf his holiness. He was encompassed with weakness as a human being. Let this get into your heart and your soul that faith is the victory. We've seen that song, right? Faith is a victory that overcomes the world. Victory is possible. So listen to these witnesses. Many years ago, I preached a message when I first started out. I called it Voices from the Sideline. That was the idea. Like when you play basketball or play a sport, you hear people yelling at you from the sideline. Back in high school, we had cheerleaders that would try to cheer us on, and the crowd, even in our Christian school, the crowd would go crazy, and we always play that home game because we had that home court advantage. Well, here's the people that you ought to listen to. Don't listen to the people at work. Don't listen to even other believers who are discouraged and are wandering around. Listen to Abraham and Moses and Joseph and Rahab. It's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it. Keep going. They stand in stark contrast to the children of Israel who lacked faith to obey. These people had the faith. When it came to that step, they said, I'm going for it. God told me to take my son up to the top of the mountain and kill him. Isaac, let's go. We're going. We're going to do it. I can't imagine. But by faith, he did. And by faith, he rewarded them. Again, I don't have all the answers of how it all works out. Abel obeyed God by faith, and he died. Enoch walked with God, and he never died, right? I don't understand how that all works. All I know is that if I had Abel and Enoch standing side by side today on the witness stand, and you could ask them any question, you'd say, hey, victory's possible. It's going to be difficult, but it's worth it. It's ahead of you, and it's so worth it. It's rewarding. Do you believe that God is? I think you do. That's why you're here. But do you believe that God is the rewarder of them that diligently seek him? If you do, you'll never stop. Diligent means to keep on with speed and haste, to keep on keeping on. I can't wait for the next step of faith. I can't wait for the next hurdle. It's okay. God's got this. In the end, it's worth it. What life are you living? Are you living the wandering life of Israel or the victorious follower of God by faith who obeyed God? That's the message of Hebrews. Are we moving forward by faith? Don't just listen to me, though. Look at the great cloud of witnesses that testify over and over again about how wonderful the reward of faith is. Would you bow your head and close your eyes?